Hey everybody, welcome back to D-Town TV, the weekly show for DSLR shooters with big lenses. My name is Matt Kloskowski.
I'm here. I am RC.
I'm here with Big Lens Guy.
This hurts.
I know, dude. RC was curling before we started the show.
So we're here to talk about big lenses and playing with big lenses and doing stuff with big lenses. And I was relaying a story. I was in New York and I was doing a helicopter ride with Joe McNally over New York City, like you do, right?
Yeah, everybody does.
I was sitting
I did
there.
that 3 times last month.
I was just sitting. He calls me up and he's just like, "Hey, you want to go fly over New York City?" And I'm like. So we're hanging out, and I'm shooting like around him because he's got things that he was working on. So I'm shooting around him as best I can, and at one point I literally had to stop and just kind of put my camera down and just watch him, just watch McNally work, because it literally is like I expected him to just be like, "Man, it's a good day to be alive," because he's like literally crouched down, one hand on the D3S, he's got his knee up, and he's got a 600. And he's hand-holding with his knee a 600 millimeter lens, and he's shooting, and we're literally like, probably with a softball, I could have thrown and hit the face of the Statue of Liberty. This helicopter's hovering over there, and he's just like...
With a 600 hand-holding.
He's just like, Rah! It was like the coolest picture ever. I'm sitting there, and I'm like, this is not a bad day. This does not suck at all.
No, not at all.
It was good. But anyway, it was just, I mentioned that to say that when you start talking about big lenses and things like that, there's a couple of other caveats, and that's what we wanted to kind of dedicate. Specialty stuff that we need to start doing now.
And I guess if you're wondering why it looks like B&H threw up over our desk, it means you didn't see last week's show. Because last week's show was... we want to do a show on lenses and talk about the lenses that we use the most for certain situations. Mm-hmm. We got halfway through last week's show and we realized there's no way that we can do this in one show. So we were going to do it in 2 shows. We will finish this in the second show. Scott and I did this way back when, but it's their older shows. We did this probably 2 or 3 years ago. So last week we did, if you didn't catch that show, we did portrait lenses and we did landscape. Mm-hmm. So we did the lenses we use for portrait and landscape. One of the things that we mentioned right up front, I'm going to mention it again, is these are Nikon lenses. Sigma, Tamron, Tokina, whatever, they're all great lenses. I just have this thing, RC has the same thing. We use what our friends use, okay? Our friends use Nikon lenses, that's how we ended up with Nikon lenses. Those companies, they would not be in business today still if they didn't make good quality lenses. I think you're going to be perfectly happy with them. If they're more affordable, they fit into the range that you need, go for it. You don't have to buy the Nikon version or the Canon version.
I like the best quote about it was, if somebody's taking a look at like the qualities of the picture, then you kind of messed up. You're looking at the wrong part of the picture.
Yeah.
If somebody's going, the chromatic aberration at this, that means that you don't have a shot.
The diffraction at the edges,
if you have a beautiful shot, believe me, people are just going to look at the shot and go, oh my God, this is an amazing shot.
Absolutely.
And that can be done with Sigma, Tamron, Nikon, Canon. Doesn't matter.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's kick it off with travel.
Zeiss. I had to say that. Sorry, I just had that. I'm like, oh my God, we're forgetting Zeiss.
So travel. So I don't know about you. I think because you've borrowed it, because I own the 28-300. You don't own it, but you've borrowed it when you go traveling. So for me, when I'm traveling, I travel light. Mm-hmm. I pack really light when I travel.
I do too.
So yeah. RC, you ever see Police Academy? You ever see Tackleberry? RC looks like Tackleberry. He whips out. He's got the backpack and the shotgun.
7 flashes.
Anyway, no. But no, if you were going overseas or whatever, you want to travel light. The 28-300. This is the full frame version of the lens. The non-full frame version is the 18-200. Canon makes some equivalents as well. You'll find lots of equivalents out there, but 28-300. I mean, you almost have it all. Mm-hmm. You've got really wide, and you've got all the way out to 300.
That's a phenomenal lens.
And when it comes to travel, the last thing you want is, and we've all heard the horror stories out there, the last thing you want is you're walking around with a backpack with 20 grand of gear in it, and you're drawing attention to yourself. This one lens on that camera, trust me, it draws enough attention to yourself already. Mm-hmm. But this one lens, it covers so much, and it's still a sharp lens. It's not, I mentioned it in the last show, it's probably not the fastest focusing lens that you're going to find out there, but a lot of times, unless you're shooting sports or people moving, you don't need that really fast focus lens. It takes care of everything, leaves you one lens in your bag. The only other thing I pack when I travel is just in case I come across landscape type scenery, I'll put the 14 and 24 in. There's something really wide. They make a 10 to 20. I think Nikon makes a 10 to 20 for non-full frame, and you're going to find a lot of Canon equivalents. But these two lenses for me, when I travel, take care of it all.
Yeah, I think that the 20-300 is really, really good, and a lot of the times, again, when you're looking at things like focusing, you can get into things like zone focus and pre-focusing and locking and things like that. A couple of things to keep in mind with this and the 18-200, is they put this on it, and I thought that this was a great thing for it. When you have these lenses, what will happen is there will be times where you're walking with it, and as you're walking and it's bumping up against your butt, it starts doing that. Dun, 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 dun. And then you walk around with this thing dangling on your camera, and it'll just sit there and just kind of sway and dangle and sway and dangle. And that then, and now you're looking for wide shots, and you throw this on your face, and you're like, oh my goodness, I don't know what's happening.
300.
So this kind of stuff, then you need to be able to kind of get back, and you want to keep it compact. What they've done is they've added a locking switch to this, so you can lock it at a specific, in this case, the 28, and now it won't creep at all. So I thought that those were really nice additions. The original 18-200 Nikon didn't have it, and then the second version of it did. They put it onto the 28-300. Yeah. Phenomenal lens.
And they all have VR too.
And they all have VR.
They all have VR. So when it comes to travel, these are the two lenses. Could you make an argument for every one of these lenses out there?
You could.
Probably. But this is what we take when we travel and to keep it light. So if you think you're going to walk around and shoot people on a street in India and you want to get close up with your 85, hey, pack your 85-1.4, but this is really going to take care of most of it.
Nice.
What's
After
next?
that, we start getting into the world of sports.
Sports.
Right. And I know a lot about sports.
This is where it gets expensive. So we're here to tell you, if you get into this world, all the stuff we told about buying the lesser quality or not just inexpensive, trying to go on the cheap, maybe you don't buy the 70-200, maybe you go with the 70-300. It all goes out the door.
You're probably sitting on top of a Bison right now, smoking a really expensive guitar, going buffoonery.
Yeah.
Forget it.
You can get into landscape photography. You can get into portrait photography. You can get into travel photography fairly inexpensively. Okay.
Wildlife, and birding,
and sports. You cannot get into inexpensively. That said, we'll give you our recommendations. Let's start from the bottom.
Oh, actually, before we do, let's take a quick break.
Let's take a quick break.
And then we'll talk about smoking cigars and
guy with big lenses.
Big guns. So stick around. We'll be right back.
Mama always said, you gotta preserve the present for those in the future. I think that's what my Romance and Landscape series was all about. I shot for 6 days, 12 hours, and 34 minutes straight. I'm pretty tired. Think I'll go home now.
Well, hi folks, my name is Scott Kelby and I want to tell you about a brand new class that I have on Kelby Training Online called Crush the Composition. Why are there so many books about composition today? Why are they all the same? If you went back to the 1940s and bought a book on composition, what do you think those chapters would be? Rule of thirds, leading lines, and fill the frame, and patterns, and all that kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, wow, here it is, 2011, and we're going over the same things that we did years and years and years ago. There's a whole different concept to getting a great shot. It's what makes your pictures go from these kind of pictures that you're disappointed with to the kind of pictures that you've always wanted to take. So I invited a small, intimate live audience to join me in an amphitheater at night under the stars for an evening that's different than anything we've done at Kelby Training. I think this class has the power to transform the way that you look at photography, the way you take images, and I think it can also be your key to getting the best images you've ever taken. I hope you'll come and watch my brand new class on Kelby Training, Crush the Composition. I guarantee you tomorrow, you'll take the best shots you've ever taken.
Welcome back, everybody, to D-Town TV, the free show for DSLR shooters. I'm here with Matt Gluskowski.
Hi.
Hey. So we're talking about the big guns.
We're talking about big lenses. So we moved over into sports lenses. We'll start at the bottom. Okay?
Sports, wildlife, birding, but mostly sports. I think
Yeah.
the sports is kind of where we lean towards.
We'll start at the bottom. God, it's getting confusing up here. There's so many of them. All right, I was going to say we'll start at the bottom because if you're, let's say kids, okay, kids, grandkids, and they play little league, soccer, softball, baseball, something like that. The 70-300 isn't a bad lens.
Yes.
It's a good entry-level lens into that. It's still fairly fast, 4.5 to 5.6. So what do you lose by getting this lens? You get out to 300, okay? Now, this is a 300. Look at the difference. 300, 300 prime.
Oh, no, wait a minute.
Look
That's a 200. That's a 200 of 2, I think.
No, 300.
Oh, that's a 300.
2.8.
Ooh, never mind.
300 2.8, 70-300. What do you lose? What you lose are a few stops because this is going to be at 5.6 when you get to 300. What does that mean for your photo? That means for your photo, the background will not be as blurry. The background will not be as soft. Okay, so if you have fans in the background and there's a fan sitting back there drinking a beer, you're going to see more of that fan sitting back there drinking a beer, or hopefully not at the kids' softball game.
Can you take care of that later?
You could, but anyway. So 70-300, it's not a bad lens. It's much less expensive than I mean, it's I don't know, $600, $700. Yeah, I mean, a very inexpensive lens. It's going to let you get in close to the action. If you're just starting out, this is probably a good place to go. Okay.
If you're outside, that's going to be a great place to go.
And that's the thing. That's another thing. Is we'll talk about the 2.8 versus the 5.6. But we talked about the background, low light. This ain't going to cut it inside. This is not going to cut it in a gymnasium, inside a hockey rink, or anything like that. At 5.6, you're not going to have a wide enough aperture to draw in enough light, and you're going to have to crank your ISO way up. Okay. Next one, 70-200. I think this is, I use this a lot when I'm shooting my kids' baseball, okay? I'll put the 1.4 teleconverter on it, and I'm able to pretty much get in as close as I want at a Little League game, okay? So very good lens. You can shoot, it's 2.8 all throughout, all right? So you can get out there to 200, you're gonna be at 2.8, you're gonna get a lot of light in, and you're also gonna get a very nice background from it. That said, when you start moving up into high school sports, so now you have a full-size football field, soccer, anything like that.
The barrier of entry is
went up in price by about $5,000.
Yeah, it's 200 or 400. What does 200 or 400 go for?
That's about $5,000.
So that's the starting point of the lens. So you have a 200 to 400 millimeter lens, and you need to just get, in sports, what it would appear to be is that you need to get tight. And I don't have a lot of experience in sports stuff, but I went out one time and I was asked to go shoot a football game. And I'm like, I think I could do this. It's really cool. So I showed up with a 200 to 400.
And that.
And a 70 to 200. And I said, all right, well, let me see what I can do with this. And I was picking off some pretty good shots that were kind of environmentals with this.
And when they get closer, when the action gets closer to you, that 70 comes in really handy.
This was okay, but I wasn't getting any of the classic shots that you would see that were really tight, really in on the action. The only way that I got that, I found was to take the 200 to 400 and shoot at 400. Like I wasn't doing a lot of the opening up here, and that allowed me to get in and around all of the details that I wanted to get on the thing. And it was very eye-opening. Like I walked away from that and I was like, well, I always thought that the guys that were just sitting there were just like, this is a nice day to be here with my big lens. But it actually had purpose. It was very purposeful for that.
So when we get into these lenses, what you're going to find is you're going to find generally a 300 prime. You're going to find a 400 prime. Usually this is the 300 2.8. You're going to find a 400 prime at 2.8. The 200 to 400 is f4, I believe. Correct, yeah. So it's f4, 200 to 400, all the way through at f4 though. So what's the difference? How do you make a decision between all this stuff? The best thing that I can tell you is that people, if you're shooting, let's say football, full-size football field, everybody seems to gravitate toward that 400. Okay, and Scott's a great example. So Scott, these are actually Scott's lenses. Scott owns the 200 to 400. He owns the 400 prime. If you ask him what he shoots the most at a football game, he's going to tell you he probably shoots that 400 prime the most at the football game. Okay, what's the trade-offs? Obviously, with a 400 prime, you're in tight. You've committed. You're going to be in tight the entire time that you're using that lens. You can't change unless you have a second body with like a 24 to 70 on it or something like that. Then you can grab that second body and shoot. But you're going to be in tight. Also, what do you get from that? You get 2.8. So you get an extra stop to let in more light so you can shoot in more low light situations with the 2.8 versus the 200 to 400 at f4. You're also going to get a nicer background. That 400 and this 300, they have that look. They're prime lenses. Prime lenses tend to be just a little more sharper. Okay, so is it sharpening that you can't do on the computer? Yeah, you can probably get away with some unsharp mask in Photoshop. But the prime lenses tend to be sharper than their non-prime equivalents, and that goes all throughout. 24 millimeter prime, a 35 prime, whatever it is, they tend to be a little bit sharper. So you get that nice soft background. You get more light. What do you lose? 200 to 400. That's what you lose. So you're committed with a 300. You're committed with a 400. With that, and you even said you ended up being at 400 most of the time.
Most of the time.
I've shot a lot of soccer. Okay, when I go shoot soccer, I take this lens with me because sometimes that action, I mean, it changes so quickly, and next thing you know, the ball's across the field. The guy launches it right at you, and if you don't have the 200 to 400, you're pretty much done. Once that action starts getting too close to you, all you can do is either grab your, if you have a second body, which I typically don't have with me, but all you can do is grab a second body, or you can now zoom out to 200 if you need it.
Now, beginner notes. If you're using lenses like this, it is pretty much impossible, unless you're Joe McNally, Moose Peterson, a couple of few people, to actually carry this, right? So what will happen is you'll see that most of these lenses have a mount right on here. That's where you want to mount your monopod or tripod. You don't mount it here, you mount it here. What will happen is if you mount this here, this is a very, very heavy lens. If you mount this, this is going to start tipping everything forward. You might mess up your mount on the inside, you might drop it. So everything gets mounted on here. It's impossibly hard to hold this for a prolonged period of time and actually get a good focus shot. You'll notice that it's 400 millimeters. You're talking 300, 400, 600. Most of the times, as a general rule, you want to make sure that you can handhold something that sits around the same zoom length. So if you're at 400 millimeter, anything under 400th of a second, you're going to introduce a form of blur. So if you're shooting at 200, 200th of a second, use that as kind of a general, kind of by the thumb. So if you can't do that, and you don't have the environment to do that, you're at 400 millimeters and you're seeing that you get a reading of 250, you're gonna get a blurry shot. It's gonna happen. So use that as and those things can be broken but generally keep that in mind.
So the best, we mentioned this in the last show. We didn't cover weddings yet, but we can cover that really quick. We mentioned this in the last show. If you're looking at anything like this, if you get to that point, the best thing you can do, rent the lens first. It's not cheap, okay? If you rent a lens like this for a week, I mean, you're going to spend a couple $100, but you got to imagine when you buy these lenses, they cost $4,000, $5,000, $6,000.
Yeah,
okay?
I'm looking
so
right now.
it's worth the investment to rent the lens for a weekend, figure out, is the 300 right for me, or is the 400 right for me, or is the 200 to 400 right for me? Do some research on it, do some testing with it. I think you'll be happier.
The 300, I just looked right now. This is the Nikon. Again, this isn't talking about Sigma camera or anything. If you look for a Nikon 300, that's $58.99.
$6,000.
The 600 f4,
$10,000.
$10,299.
All right, and wedding. So we can cover wedding really quick, I think. I think if you go back and watch the portrait section, which was the last one, I think a lot of wedding is very similar. I see a lot of wedding shooters, the 70 to 200 is a workhorse. I don't see as many with the 24 to 70. The 70 to 200 is a workhorse. The 85, the 51.4, the 51.8, and by the way, if you're looking at the 1.4 or the 1.8, the price is like $1,000 difference. I gotta tell you, I'd almost go with the 1.8.
Oh,
I go with the cheaper alternative. But
Absolutely.
you'll find, the one thing you'll find amongst wedding photographers is lots of primes. You'll find the 50, you'll find the 24, you'll find the prime lenses. Why? Not just because of the depth